Now that we have a form inside our widget, it is a good time to add a save button that we will use to validate and save the form data. And to do that, we're going to add a new button to the actions of our app bar. So here I can type in actions like this, and this is going to be a list which contains a flat button which has a child, which is a text which says save, and it will have a style of text style with a font size of 18 and a color of colors.white, like this. And then I need to add an onPressed callback which calls a submit method, and over here I can define this method as void underscore submit, like this. And here I can add a to-do that says validate and save form, and another one that says submit data to Firestore. Okay, so to validate and save our form, we need to define a global key. And this is a new concept, so I'm going to type in some code and then I'm going to explain it. So over here, I can type final underscore form key equals global key of type form state, like this. And then I can scroll down to the definition of the form over here, and I can add a key argument, and I can pass form key over here. I'm going to quickly format the code as well. And now that we have this form key, we can use it to access the state of the form. So let's see how we can do this. First of all, I'm going to create a new Boolean method called validate and save form, like this. And here I can type in final form equals underscore form key dot current state, and then if form dot validate, then form dot save, and then if this is successful I can return true, and otherwise I can return false, like this. And now I can update this submit method like this. So I can say if underscore validate and save form, and for now I can type print with form saved, like this. So the main idea here is that when the user presses on the save button, then we call this method which validates and saves the form, and if validation is successful, then this condition is true and we can submit the data to Firestore. So this is a good time to hot reload. And as we can see, now we have a save button. So I can press this, and if I open the console, I can see that there is a line that says form saved. Now, this is all well and good. However, we still need to see how we can retrieve the values that the user has entered once the form is saved. And this is done by defining some variables that we can use to store the form data. So over here, we can define two new variables. And the first one is a string called name, and the second one is an integer which is called rate per hour, like this. And now that we have these variables, we can scroll down to the declaration of the text fields, and for the job name we can add an onSaved callback, which is a closure that takes a string value. And we can use this to set the name variable that we have just created, like this. Similarly, we can add an onSaved callback to the rate per hour text field, and this will also give us a string value. So if we want to assign this to the rate per hour, we need to parse it into an integer. So here we can set the rate per hour to be equal to int.parse with value. So this is a method that we can use to parse a string into an integer. And if parsing returns a null value, we can provide a default value. And in this case, we can have a default value of 0. And now that we have made this change, we can go back up to the submit method over here, and we can update the print statement to show the name that we have saved and the rate per hour as well. So let's see if this works. I'm going to hot reload, and then here I'm going to type in a job name such as blogging and a rate per hour of 10. And then I can open up the debugger, and I'm going to save, and I can see that the values are now printed to console. And the reason this works is that we added the unsaved callbacks in our text form fields, and we use them to update the local state variables that we have created in our widget. By the way, I want to point out that when we use unsaved, all we want to do is to assign the current value to a local variable. However, the widget doesn't need to be rebuilt as a result of this, so we don't need to call setState. Okay, so saving data works, but what about validation? Well, if we wanted, we could add a validator callback to our job name. So here we can specify a validator argument, which is a closure that gives us a value, and it should return an error string. So here we could type value.isNotEmpty, question mark, null, and then colon, name can't be empty, like this. And if I hot reload, I should be able to now delete the job name, and if I save, I can see that I get a validation error. Okay, so let me do a summary of how to set up a form for user input. First of all, we need to declare a form widget, and this widget should be configured with a global key. Then we need to define some text form fields that have the form as their ancestor. And for each form field, we can define a validator and an unsaved callback. We can then use the validator to show an error if the text input is invalid, and we can use the unsaved callback to set some variables that will hold the values inside the text form fields. And we can add a button with a callback that we can use to validate and save the form. And this is what we do over here. So the important takeaway here is that when using forms, we can validate and save all the input fields in one go by calling the form.validate and form.save methods. Instead, when we use text field, we can retrieve the current text at any time by using a text editing controller instead. So it is entirely up to you whether you want to use forms with text form fields or use text fields with text editing controllers instead. Okay, so let's continue on the next video.